and also to help us know how to navigate through this. I think Randy's going to tell a little bit more about kind of our beginning relationship, but we have known each other since seminary days. He has 2 daughters. We have 2 daughters. He performed the ceremony for Ellen and Sawyer, and I performed the ceremony for one of his daughters. So our lives have been intertwined in just wonderful and beautiful ways. And if you have those kind of friends where you may not see them for a while, but when you do see them, you can just pick right up where you left off. Those are true, wonderful gifts. And I think this morning you're going to, after this morning with him, the time with him, you're going to see why he is that kind of friend and that kind of person. I know your life is going to be blessed. So we're glad that you're here. And one of the things that sort of makes us and helps us to be a body is also that we will walk with one another and care for one another. And to do that is also kind of knowing one another. So would you stand up for just a moment and maybe greet those who are around you and welcome them to our time of worship today.
Join us. Crowned with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but his own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy may be seated, and as you're seated, the children may be dismissed to Children's Church.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. Glad you're here. I've really enjoyed the time I've been able to spend with Kim and Jerry. We met, yes, at seminary. My wife, Diane, worked at Spalding College. Kim worked at Spalding College in the admissions office. Jerry was at seminary, and somewhere on that experience, early on, we met, Jerry and I met, and struck up a friendship. Diane would come home and say, I have met this delightful young lady, and I want us to go out to eat. And the more we talked, we went, oh, wow, these people go together. And Jerry, I asked him to come down to Montezuma, down in South Georgia, where I served a church for a number of years. I invited him to come down, and I do get a little bit of anxiety. Two places in life. One, when I fly, it's not the experience of flying, it's getting to the airport in Atlanta that creates stress for me. Yeah, common ground, huh? I think I need medication for it. And the other is preaching. And it's like, I've done this for 40 years, but still there's just a little bit of edge. So I invited Jerry to come down and preach at First Baptist Montezuma. And in my anxiety, I got their names crossed up. So instead of Kim and Jerry, it was Jim. Yeah. I can't even finish that out. And I don't think I did it one time. I think I did it twice. And then realized it just wasn't going to work. So I went on from there. But they are such a delightful couple, such good friends. I just admire them so much and love their family. Oh my gosh, their girls, our girls. There's just a bond and a connection there that I cherish so much. Grief and loss. I'm going to be talking about those two things and more. But I want you to be aware, if you are early in the grief process, I don't want the words that I use to create a trigger for you. Now, I can't keep that from happening, but I want you to be aware that whenever we bring up those topics and we talk about the people that we have lost, it may create some kind of reaction. And just be aware of it. Don't try to avoid it or ignore it. Just pay attention to it. Diane, my wife, in the spring of 2019, began to experience some pain in her lower back and her abdomen. And we could not find the source or cause of it. So we tried the local physician, who recommended physical therapy, who then recommended orthopedic. Everything was checking out. And then finally we went to a neurologist because the pain she was describing sounded more like nerve pain. He ordered a MRI and CAT scan and all those kind of tests. On a Wednesday afternoon, August the 14th, of 2019, he called. Diane put him on speakerphone on her cell phone and came up to my office. And he said, Ms. Gregg, your back is fine, but we have found a mass on your pancreas. And those words plunged us in a direction of more tests, more doctors, chemotherapy, radiation, and lots of numbers. Became more familiar with things like tumor markers and hemoglobin and medications. That in itself was pretty tough. But we found someone that we believed could do surgery. He was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Froedtert Hospital, Dr. Douglas Evans. And we went up there on a wing and a prayer that he would be the surgeon that could do something. He was delightful, kind and compassionate in every way. And he said, yes, we can take your pancreas out. I did not know that was an option. And then you can do an insulin pump and medication to take care of its other functions. And there was hope. Her tumor marker had dropped significantly, so we had double hope. The plan was to come back in March of 2021. We went up on the 8th. Surgery was scheduled for the 10th. We did the usual lab work. The lab work and the x-ray was sent to Dr. Evans. He met with us on that Monday. He said, everything looks okay to me, but I want the x-ray department to look at it more closely because I'm not trained in this to read it. Tuesday we went over again, and then Tuesday afternoon he called and said, could y'all come back to the clinic? We did. Standing in front of the elevator in the parking deck, Diane said, I know what it is. I know why he wants us to come back. And I said, what do you think it is? She said, it's spread. We went into his examining room, and those were his words. Gathered there with his PA and all the staff that we had grown to know and love. It was quite devastating to hear. So we gathered our stuff and we went back. Our girls were coming up that very day and were already on their way, in fact. They arrived and we went, instead of crying in the lobby, we actually went to Chicago and ate some pizza. And that's sort of the fingerprint of who Diane was and continues to be in my heart. So what I've just shared with you is what I call my pain story. The days, the people, the events, what happened, and how life changed. I think that's where I connect with you, or you connect with me, because you have a pain story also. Different names, different situations, different events, and yet all the same. I wondered what was happening. I couldn't understand it completely, and I don't think you can. There's just too many moving parts to it. So after March, we came back home, and it was a slippery slope from there until the morning of August the 4th, a little bit before 10, and Diane took her last breath in our den, surrounded by her family, as we would want it to be. I felt like grief had walked up the sidewalk to our house, didn't push the doorbell, slammed open the door, walked in and sat down in my favorite recliner, and stole the remote control to our life. I didn't know what to do with that. Diane passed away. We grieved. We were overwhelmed. There was shock. I do believe that God gives us shock to protect us. There's too much to process at one time, and we sort of insulate ourselves that we can keep functioning, though it's probably on a minimal level. After the first of the year, 2021, I discovered the work of Dr. Alan Wolfelt. And in reading some of his material, I finally decided to go to some of the training programs he offered out in Fort Collins, Colorado. And there I found really, really good information. I found a role model, and then I found an environment. Dr. Wolfelt is a proponent of the word companioning. You've heard of the word companion, and we all miss that companionship when we don't have our friends with us or our family with us, but especially when we lose a loved one. I thought I knew grief because I'd been a minister for 40 years. I don't know how many funerals I had been a part of, a lot. Don't know how many memorial services, not that either. Visited a lot of people, walked with them through cancer and other health issues. So I thought I had a little, maybe a fast track, but it's different when you're taking someone to get on a roller coaster and you're watching them do all the dips and turns and twists than when you get on that roller coaster. That life experience is totally different. So I went out and listened to Dr. Wolfelt. I got the information. I watched his role, the way he modeled it. And then we shared our pain in that environment. I learned there a lot of things that I want to share with you in a brief time. When we lose someone we love or something we love, we grieve. That loss could be a person, it could be a job, it could be a move to another house, another city, it could be a dream. The list is almost endless. But we're going to grieve because it is a natural and normal experience of life. Loss comes in so many different forms. It can be a marriage, a divorce. It can be having children. It can be infertility. It can be a dream. It can be a career change. The list is endless. Even, I want to put on that list, a pet, because pets are very therapeutic. I think it's one of the most highly recommended sources of help to someone who's lost a loved one is a pet. And yet, when loss happens, it changes our story. Not the one we thought we had a story, we thought we had a dream, we thought where the book was going, and we were going to turn the pages and that would be the next chapter, and then suddenly it's not there and it's not an option. And you wonder, what in the world am I going to do? So this is what I learned from Dr. Wolfelt, and if you don't hear anything else, I hope you take this away. If we grieve well, we can mourn well. And if we mourn well, we can live well. If we grieve well, we can mourn well. If we mourn well, we can grieve well. So I learned that loss creates grief, and we can grieve in many ways. It's going to impact us. It's going to impact us mentally because initially we are confused and overwhelmed. It's going to affect us emotionally because we feel the sadness and we feel the tears. It's going to affect us relationally because we want to isolate and pull back in our shell. And even the people in our life don't know what to say or what to do. I am cursed with at least two really bad things. And one is I like to be a fixer and I like to rescue people. The problem is nobody wants to be fixed and nobody wants to be rescued. And yet we take those tendencies with us into relationships, and we want to fix or we want to rescue, and we don't want that. It affects us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. But it is a normal and natural experience. It's like going to the ocean. The waves come in, the waves go out. That's the emotions of grief. There's high tide, there's low tide. Low tide, I could run a marathon. High tide, I can't get out of the bed. And it varies from day to day and week to week. But this I also learned about grief. It's not a destination to reach. It doesn't have a timeline. It affects every dimension of who we are. And it reminds us of who we have loved and where we love them. So initially, grief was the enemy. I didn't like it. I got mad, I got resistant, I wanted to push back against it. And then I realized that grief is the marker of where we have loved and been loved. And so now it's more of embracing and reminding. I still don't like to cry. I don't. But you have to. You have to let the tears come to the surface. What else do we lose? These are called secondary losses. we lose our identity. Because the instant Diane died, we were a we, and then suddenly it was me. And she completed me in so many ways. She was the social person. She was the decorator. Do you know how many things I put up in our house to decorate? Guess low. Really low. I think I put 3 things up, and 2 of them were up after she died. I put these 2 industrial fans on our deck. She has not let me forget that yet. But I miss my person. My identity changed. Not only my identity, but my safety. Now, we don't think we're better than other people, but let's be honest and transparent. We sort of think sometimes that our Christianity, because we're a Christian or a minister or a Sunday school teacher or any of those other things we do, that we sort of get a little, maybe a touch of extra credit. And then suddenly, didn't look for the degrees, didn't look for the roles, didn't look for 40 years. Here came life. And then you lose meaning and purpose. Who am I now without the person who made me who I am? So you lose identity, you lose safety, you lose meaning and purpose. Those are called secondary losses. And then there's a whole new area of the different forms of grief. Diane was 69 when she died, and in some ways, I would almost call that a normal grief. I do wish she was still here. I wish we had more days and weeks and years. But you do somewhat expect someone at some point when they get older, we know that death's going to happen. But there's other forms of grief that are not quite as expected, and that's where traumatic grief comes in. Traumatic grief is how a person dies. Young Millie was the granddaughter of my dear friends Karen and Alan Murray. Millie was 3 when she was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And if you wanted a picture of health and vitality, it would have been her. Sparkly eyes, deep dimples, innocence, and yet so rambunctious. And she fought the fight. And her parents were with her, and Karen and Alan were with her. But that grief takes you to a different level because her death is out of sequence. We bury older people. We don't bury children. And parents die first. Children don't die first. And yet when it happens, it turns us upside down and it lingers. And the real concern about grief is if we don't process it, we get stuck. And it's like watching the same movie over and over and over again every day. So there's anticipatory grief, traumatic grief, ambiguous grief, grief without a closure to it. Jerry mentioned the pandemic and COVID. One of my dear friends, Charles and Pat McDuffie, Charles developed leukemia, and he was doing quite well. And then he had a setback, and they put him in Emory Hospital, and he was in intensive care. And he could not be with Pat, and Pat could not be with him. So as he took his final breaths, she was talking to him on a cell phone. So that in itself is ambiguous. There's not a closure, and yet it's traumatic also. So we have grief, trauma, and ambiguous. That's a lot to unpack and try to process. So this first little point is, if we grieve well, so how do we do that? First, I think we need to learn a little bit more about grief, because when we lose someone, it's like it plops us down in the middle of this wilderness. We don't have a GPS. We don't have a roadmap. No one can really tell us how to get out of it. They can tell us how they did it, but their way may not work for our way. So I think some of the things we have to do is understand grief, the nature of it. It has its own words, its own vocabulary, its own moving systems, processes. And then we learn to lean into it. You cannot avoid grief. That's the bad news. It's going to come in some form, and yet I put a footnote there. You're going to do it your way. Whatever that way is, you're going to do it your way. Pay attention to it, sit with it, like a friend that has come to visit. Why are the tears here today? Why am I feeling this way? Honor and process your emotions. Whatever you're feeling is okay. God created us to embrace all of life. A challenge for us is we often focus only on one side of the vocabulary. We focus on love, and yet loss is the other side of love. We grieve because we loved. There's hope, but there's also despair. And so we learn to live with these emotions because they are healthy. They're the way that we embrace all of this life experience. So we learn to grieve well. We lean into it. We walk toward the uncomfortableness. And you may be sitting there and thinking, okay, good information, nice lecture. What next? The problem with grief is not in our head, it's in our heart. We don't grieve because we've got information up here. We grieve because there's something broken down here. And the broken is, I cannot express my love the way I want to. So it brings us to, if we grieve well, we can mourn well. So what is mourning? Well, grief has energy to it. It is energy. But it's energy begging to be heard or expressed. So if we don't give grief an outlet, it's like a steamer inside of us. It keeps cooking. And the same things keep coming up over and over again, and we keep replaying the tape, but it doesn't take us anywhere. So while grief is a normal and natural experience, we live in a culture that does not have space for it. Grief takes time. It has its own timeline. We live in a culture, though, that says, be successful, achieve your goals, be strong, get over it, and move on. None of those work with grief because it's a life experience that we have to embrace, pay attention to, and let it lead us to where we need to go. Unfortunately, we bring our grief with us to church. And there, our good hearts, we are caring people. We are loving people. But sometimes we don't know what to say either. So we say things we have heard other people say. Well, it was God's will. There was a plan. God needed an angel. And it's like, that adds to the grief. It adds additional pain to what the person is carrying. That's out of sequence also. The sequence is, when your heart is broken, you have to sit with a broken heart. I can't be spiritual when I'm not ready to be spiritual yet. I can't hear it yet. So we're trying to push people through a process that can't be pushed through. It is energy that needs to be expressed in an outward way. These are just some of the ways that you can mourn. Mourn is, we take the love, the stories, the memories, and we share them. So if you're with me very long, I'm going to tell you a story about Diane because she is still a part of my life. You can't see her, but she's here. And so far, I think she thinks I'm doing pretty good with this sermon. Though she did suggest that I tell you a story. So here it is. Diane, you need to know her. I would love for you to know her. She's 5'3", blonde hair, blue eyes the color of blue jeans, had more energy than any Energizer battery, loved an adventure, never stayed with the same recipe twice. And her little bubbly self, when she wakes up in the morning, she wakes up like she's hooked up to a 220 volt outlet. Me, I wake up and it's like, I want to think, but I can't think yet. So Diane would wake up and she'd say, "What do you want for supper?" And I would say, "I can't even find my foot yet. I want to wake up the way you do, but I can't." So me being the caring and compassionate husband, I said, "You're not stop." So we agreed she would not move until I was awake. That was the agreement when we went to bed. So the next morning, I felt her wake up. She didn't move. So I went, the sigh was such a powerful force in our family earlier, but then my children ignored it. And then eventually Diane did too. So I sighed. I rolled over. I looked. She's got her head covered up with a blanket. And you see her little face, and her eyes are open. And I looked at her, and she said, "I didn't move." But you didn't have to. But she was a gift to me and everybody who knew her. And so there's energy in that love and relationship that needs to be expressed. It needs to go outward. In the same way, your love for your people need to be expressed. And we do that through funerals. Funerals serve a beautiful purpose. Are they hard? Yes, they are. They're so hard. Write the obituary, plan the service, invite the speakers, see if you got your clothes clean and pressed. What are you going to do for the spray on the casket if there is a casket? It's so hard. And then you come in and there's tears. You can't keep the tears from coming. But a funeral serves a beautiful and healthy service. I also think that memorial services are helpful too. Diane died during COVID, and so on August the 8th, I think her funeral was, we had a graveside service with 20 people. That wasn't Diane. So in October or November of 21, we had a memorial service in which we could honor her appropriately. And we had tables set up with some of the pictures of her earlier in life and some of her objects that we would associate with her. It had to be a cookbook. The good Lord knows we had plenty and still have plenty of cookbooks, though I'm not sure why we didn't use those a lot. But I say that tongue in cheek. She had Post-it notes in the recipes. So funerals, memorial services. Also, because my children and grandchildren there, grandchildren especially, they were 8, 11, and 15 when she died. So they're surrounded by their grandmother. That is quite raw and real. So I thought the first Christmas, I want them to remember her, so I got some of her clothes and found someone that would turn those into a bear, a teddy bear. Gave them to them at Christmas, and you would have thought I had given them $1 million. They hugged them. They're on their beds now. This year, I'm giving them all quilts with some of her clothes because I still have her clothes, and she has already told me, "You don't need to keep the clothes. I'm not going to wear those. I don't like them anymore." You know, all that stuff. She told me to take them to TJ Maxx, and I said, "I'm not going to do that." So this is my way of mourning Diane. But we also do it when we gather. We do her birthday, but not with cake and candles. We go out to eat, and we invite somebody to go with us because at Diane's table was always wide open. So if we grieve well, we can mourn well. And mourning is where we let it find a way outward. And you will too. Your person loved to do certain things, whether it was have a garden, farm, shop. If you really want to do it, get some gift cards to their favorite store and pass them out to friends, or give them to your children. Play their favorite music. Read their favorite scripture. Do anything that gives an expression to that loss. I am deeply committed to my children and grandchildren remembering Diane. And I'm giving them everything I can to make sure that happens, because I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Frederick Buechner, a writer that I have read and know Jerry has read also, he uses the expression of stewardship of pain. I like that. It's not much we'd think about it, but this pain we get from loss, what do we do with that? It needs to go somewhere, and so I think I need to be a good steward of it and help my children remember their mother and grandmother, but also learn to live life forward. I'm also drawn to the writings of Dr. Megan Devine. We have some handouts here with resources if you choose to look at them, but she's written the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay. Because when we get into grief, we wonder, am I doing this right? And we'll look at somebody else and say, well, they're crying, but I don't cry. Or they're not crying, and I am crying. Or they won't get out of the house, but I want to go everywhere. And her point is, it's okay. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, wherever you are, it's okay. You don't want to get out of your bed today? It's okay. The point being, you're going to do grief your way, and that's okay. So what do we do with grief? We listen to it, pay attention to it, lean into it, let it remind us of the one we loved and who loved us. Find or form a trusted and safe relationship. It can be in our friends and fellow church members. It can be a neighbor. It can be a family member. But find someone who will respect your space, hear your story, be compassionate with you so that you can unload this truck of pain that we carry. If we grieve well, we can mourn well, and we can live well. I will tell you that this journey, and I'm going to say my journey is not any different than yours. I just have the opportunity to be here and speak. It's tough. It is the toughest thing I've ever had to do. And yet we all will walk this path at some point along the way. So how do you live well in a time of loss? And for me, I think it's being aware of what is happening and then listening for the presence of God in quiet ways, almost whispers. Early, like within the first month, Diane wanted a verse of scripture that she could hold on to and repeat. So together we looked and found 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I never saw Diane afraid. I don't know how many chemo treatments she had. I would hesitate to think how many vials of blood she had drawn, but I never saw fear. In her small physical package, there was a big presence of courage. Power, her power was being able to show up and do the tests. Her love radiated. If she were here, you would like her so much better than me, I promise you. Such a loving person and a sound mind. It took us as far as we could, making the best decisions we could with the names, with the information we had in front of us. So, how do we live well? We listen for God's presence. So, at the end of the day, we would go back to, where did you see God today? And it would always be a person with a name. Not a major event, but a name. Dr. Douglas Evans in Milwaukee, what a gift he was to us. With the dire diagnosis that was in front of us, his words were, don't ever give up hope. Debbie Lamb, a retired teacher that worked with my Lindsay, she makes this Coca-Cola cake that has fudge icing. It's to die for. It really is. Cup of coffee, cold milk, or just eat it by the handful, any way you want to do it. But she would put it in these full pans, and on the top, she would write so that you could see it, "Dear heart." She calls everybody dear heart. "Dear heart, this is prepared in love. May you eat it with love and be well." If she brought one, she brought 50. Mary DeLetto lived across the street. We had very little in common. And yet when Diane was diagnosed, she immediately started bringing flowers every week that came out of her garden. Bill and Michelle Baker, such dear friends from Texas. Pastor Eddie Chapman and his wife Stacy, big African-American young man, so full of life and energy, but Diane loved him and loved to hear him pray. Because when he prayed, just the physical sound felt like he was shoulder to shoulder with Moses. It's like the whole world was shaking. So how do we live well? I think we have to walk into the discomfort. I think we have to pay attention to it, listen to it, learn from it, not try to deny it, avoid it, or bypass it. For in that discomfort is where we find our common ground with each other. We're not going to find our strength in the success, achievements, or goals. We're going to find it where life does not match up. So we acknowledge the pain of our loss, embrace the potential of growth. Grief does not end our story, it changes our story. So in this, I've talked about the story of pain, the story of searching, looking for resources, the story of grieving, the story of mourning, and now the story of living well. I had the privilege to be in Sedona and train with Dr. Joanne Cacciatore back in September. She wrote the book, Bearing the Unbearable, and it's listed on the paper here. And in it, she brought up the question of when we grieve, we often ask why. Why did my loved one die? Why did it have to happen this way? And she suggested that that's a question we all know you can't get an answer to. But she said, why not ask this question? Why am I still here? And in asking that question, I feel a sense of direction. I'm still here to draw another breath, to take another step, to love my people, love my grandbabies, set an example that they can see, yes, things happen, but yes, you can go forward. But I want to go forward in a way that I take all the memories, because those are important and they need to know some of them. So I simply ask you, why are you still here? You will hurt, but there needs to come a time when the edges of that hurt soften just a little bit. And the grief is no longer the enemy, but it is the friend. Almost the guide of where you loved and who you loved and why that mattered. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. What a treasure these two right here are to my heart and soul and to you. Thank you so much.
you stand, please, and join me as Cliff plays. Let's just enter into a time of prayer together. And maybe God's Spirit has spoken to you today or touched something very deep inside of you that where you are hurting. And we're going to be here in the front. If you'd like someone to pray with you about the grief and the pain, the loss that you're experiencing, we would love to be able to do that. We're going to take a moment. Just invite you to come. We'll be glad to pray with you. God, one of the things that we are so thankful for is that we never walk alone in the experiences that we have in life. That you walk with us. You're so faithful to do that. And yet you have also called this great cloud of witnesses to be around us and to take this journey that, as we've heard this morning, is a journey not of our own choosing, but one that so many of us face and will face. I thank you for the power that you give to us. I thank you for the presence. I thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who showed us the way to you and how to connect to you and live as your children. We have so much to be thankful for. I thank you for the ability to remember and to carry memories with us, so that in some very meaningful and powerful ways, those that we lose to death really are not gone, but they continue to be with us every day. God, we admit to you that we are hurting. We've all lost some things, lost relationships, friendships, dreams, loved ones. And I'm just so thankful that you are present with us. We couldn't do it without you. Not at all. And may we sense and feel your strength, not only today, but also in the days ahead. For it's in your name we are gathered here today for worship. Amen. Randy, thank you for being with us. We've looked forward to this time for a long time, and I knew it would be good and for all of us, and it has been. Thank you. Randy's going to be here in the front for a few more minutes. If you want to talk with him about anything, we invite you to do that. Somebody you know, if it's not you, somebody you know is hurting, and they just may need you to walk beside them today, or to call them, or to connect with them in some way. It's a small thing, but it can mean a lot. So be the presence of Christ to someone today as we leave. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.